We start with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Jonathan Lemire, Associated Press White House reporter and MSNBC political analyst. Matthew Miller, a former chief spokesman at the Department of Justice. Journalist Alicia Menendez, now a contributing editor for the website Bustle. Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root. And in Washington, a former senior CIA officer and station chief in Russia, John Sipher. John, I start with you. I talked to former intelligence officials who, from the moment they walked into Trump Tower and briefed the president-elect about the intelligence community's assessment on Russia's role in meddling in the 2016 election, through the Khashoggi murder and slaughter, through the constant bizarre, now suspicious interactions with Vladimir Putin and others, have had their eye on what is really unprecedented hostility from the intelligence community's most important, most powerful client and customer, the president.
That's right. I mean, the disconnect here between the president of the United States and what is the reality on the ground is something we haven't seen in a long time. And these sort of attacks at the intelligence community make it really hard for the leaders of those agencies, you know, who represent large workforces around the world. And they have to maintain credibility with that workforce. You know, Donald Trump has never led a large organization and had to have developed trust and credibility with people who work for him. And he's not making their job any easier.
You know, Matt, you reminded us of one of the most really heinous tweets that this president has sent. And he sends a lot of ugly things. It was comparing the intelligence community to Nazis.
Yeah, look, one of the things about this attack...
There it is. I'm sorry. For anyone in their car. The president tweeted this: intelligence agencies should never have allowed this fake news to leak into the public. One last shot at me. Are we living in Nazi Germany? I believe that was about the dossier back in January or February of 2017.
Yeah, that's right. One of the things about this attack on the intelligence communities today is this is a feature of Donald Trump. It has been going all the way back to the transition. I think the only thing that's changed with this attack today is he has broadened his disagreement with them. He has been disagreeing with them on Russia publicly, privately, ever since the transition, ever since he was first briefed on Russian interference. But now he disagrees with them not just on Russia, but on North Korea, on ISIS, on Iran, on North Korea. And I think the reason he always disagrees with them is one of the central tenets of his political strategy has always been to create this alternative reality, this fantasy world that's not based on reality, that's not based on truth. And any independent arbiter of the truth, whether it be the intelligence community, whether it be law enforcement, whether it be the media, has to be constantly attacked and delegitimized every time they present real facts to him or to the American public.
General Hayden, who was on this network, I think on this very day, either on the day of or the day before the intel chiefs flew up to New York to brief then President-elect Trump, made that point. I mean, the intelligence community seems to have seen this coming. I pulled that up. Let's watch it.
Frankly, I've been stunned by the degree to which Mr. Trump has been willing to push back on what the intelligence community believes to be a high confidence judgment. And Nicole, he doesn't seem to be pushing back because he's got different data or new data. He seems to be pushing back because it contradicts what he would like the narrative to be. And that's a very unusual place for American intelligence to be with his first client.
He's completely correct. I mean, this is how the president operates. In some ways, it's the most simple answer is the correct one, and he operates in a different reality. It's about public relations. And I think that in terms of the Russia, in his questioning of the intelligence conclusions there, a lot of that was the fear of being considered an illegitimate president. That if Russia interfered with the 2016 election, that means he didn't win fair and square. We know how much the fact that his popular vote defeat sort of rankles him, and this is a piece to that, even setting aside perhaps whatever other ties he or his people around him may have to Russia. And this as well, he's trying to paint for the American people this image of a successful presidency, and in this regard, in the foreign policy realm, he is saying that ISIS is crushed and defeated, that North Korea is been neutralized, and we are well on our way to a deal to disarm them with their atomic weapons program. You know, the same about Iran. And none of those things line up with the facts. And the intelligence community deals with facts, and that's what they're presenting here. And that is what upsets him so much, where he takes, because they're painting a different picture, a far less sunny picture of America and the world than Donald Trump wants the voters to believe. So therefore, he takes the incredibly unusual step. At this point, he's done it so many times, there's a risk of becoming numb to it. But contradicting publicly the conclusions of your own intelligence services, it can't be oversaid how just unprecedented that is and how disturbing that is.
And we should. There's certain things where the numbness can set in. This seems like we become numb to this at our own peril. Peter Baker has some reporting in the New York Times that around this area of really bizarre, dangerous foreign policy, the president, who's under investigation by his own law enforcement agencies for possibly being a Russian asset, now has some Republicans breaking with him. Peter Baker writes today that a growing chorus of Republican critics for Trump's foreign policy are emerging. More than 2 years into his administration, the disconnect between President Trump and the Republican establishment on foreign policy has rarely been as stark. In recent days, the president's own advisors and allies have been pushing back, challenging his view of the world and his prescription for its problems. The growing discontent among Republican national security hawks was most evident on Tuesday when Senator McConnell effectively rebuked the president by introducing a measure denouncing a precipitous withdrawal of American troops from Syria and Afghanistan. I'm sorry, maybe they shouldn't have covered for him when he talked about grabbing women in the bleeps, when he did all of his other horrible things, and now they've got him really endangering American national security, and they want to pass a bill?
I mean, you read the report, for those of us who actually read the report, and it begins with such stark and sobering terms about the relationship between China and Russia, about the fact that this is the most aligned they've been since the 1950s, about the fact that they are working together towards global disorder. And again, in those opening pages, it says, not only is this happening, but our allies are abandoning us over our changes to trade and international security. So we have the greatest threats we've ever had, and we are the most alone we've ever been. To your question about Republicans, I think it's telling that in the House, you have them passing a piece of legislation that would prevent the president from pulling out of NATO without congressional approval. I hear from sources that there will be there's already been similar legislation proposed on the Senate side, and that they're very certain that they will be able to vote on that legislation. Whether or not they can get enough Republican votes is the question.
John Sipher, I remember part of the 10-day blur that was Anthony Scaramucci's tenure as White House communications director. There was something, and it was laced with bad words that we can't say on TV, about people who thought they were there to protect the country from Donald Trump. Is the intelligence community, do they look to you like they're asking Congress to protect them and the country from Donald Trump?
No, the intelligence community, has been wrong in the past, but one thing I can say for sure is these professionals are doing their best to provide the best intelligence they can to these policymakers. If policymakers want to go in a different direction, that's fine. They will continue to work as hard as they possibly can for the president. But what's weird here is this constant disconnect and these constant attacks. It's almost like, he's a cult leader, and I'm sure cult leaders are mesmerizing to their followers, but at some point reality catches up here, and the intelligence community is going to keep providing the information that they have, and they have no other choice. Otherwise, they lose credibility with their own workforce, and it's better to quit, frankly, than to embarrass yourself publicly and lose your legacy.
Do you think Gina Haspel did herself any damage? There were people inside the intelligence community who spoke out about the president's, seemingly bizarre, but maybe not when we get to the end of the story, comments really taking up the line that the Saudi royal court was putting out over the line from the CIA. I mean, have there been flashpoints that inside the CIA or the intelligence community have rankled the workforce you talk about?
Well, it's got to be hard because she represents that workforce, and she has to be credible to them. And so she has to be seen to be providing, truth to power. That's what it's all about for the organization. Doesn't mean they're right all the time, but she can't be seen to be skewing intelligence, making intelligence political. And so she's in a tough position. If the president continues to push back against her, it weakens her with her workforce.
And the president has dismantled the former leadership of the FBI because he didn't like what they did. Everyone is gone. Director Comey, Deputy Director McCabe, General Counsel Baker is gone. He has targeted members of the intelligence community. Here he is in an interview with CBS, targeting them by name.
Do you think any intelligence agencies, U.S. intelligence agencies, are out to get you?
Well, certainly in the past, it's been terrible. You look at Brennan, you look at Clapper, you look at Hayden, you look at Comey, You look at McCabe, you look at Strzok and his lover, Lisa Page. You look at other people in the FBI that have been fired, that are no longer there. Certainly, I can't have any confidence in the past, but I can have a lot of confidence in the present and the future, because it's getting to be now where we're putting our people in. But in the past, no.
So his people are in. And this morning he tweeted at his people that they were passive, naive, and that they needed to go back to school.
And what's interesting also, Nicole, is notice his description, his complaints. It's not evidence-based. It's not they were wrong on this and I had to remove them. It's describing a reality show. Well, this person had a lover, and this person didn't like me, and this person sent a mean tweet. That's his description. He doesn't have an analytical reason for having a problem. What concerns me about all of this, yes, we become somewhat numb to the president's bad behavior, but this, to me, given the last year's election, given what's now happening with McConnell rebuking him, it is a disintegration of the unity that we need for national security. You've got the president over here. You've got afraid Republicans in the Senate over here. You've got the national security state basically saying, trust us, we're sending secret letters to keep things safe to the New York Times or whatever, but you don't know who it is. No one is working together. I would almost rather have all of our leadership working together to do the wrong thing than to have 4 different sections of government who have absolutely no unity whatsoever.
Well, let me stay with that, because something you hear from a lot of people in government, Democrats and Republicans, is that nothing bad has happened yet. But what you're describing is really almost like what Steve Bannon articulated, which was dismantling the state.
Yes.
They have had some success, unfortunately, in doing that. And you know, what's your sense of what would happen if we had a real crisis?
So the problem is, and I hear a lot of people say this, like, well, if a real crisis happens, this will rally people around Trump. No,
they say he'll act normal. He's never acted normal before. How do you know he'll act normal?
He won't act normal because this is normal for him. This behavior that's erratic and insane. And I think at this point, if something terrible were to happen, I say this as somebody who's getting on a flight to go to the Super Bowl, which is a national security event, which there's all sorts of things and dangers that could potentially happen down there. This country will not rally around this president. They'll blame him. They will see the government shutdown. They will see the angry teeth. They will say,
that's a great point. 60%.
Yes,
that's a great point. I don't want to let that sound go, because the president named Brennan, Clapper, Hayden, Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page. At least half of them Republicans. They never attacked Trump. They investigated and attacked Russia for meddling in our election. It seems that we always come back to where we started, which is that he can't stand, you know, anyone messing with his mother Russia.
Yeah, that's right. And a number of those people you named, Strzok, Page, are career officials. You know, a lot of them are some of the appointees of Republicans.
Hayden spent their career, and Clapper too. They all are.
That's exactly right. And when you see him talking about the intelligence communities, he's talking about not just the political appointees in the Obama administration who started some of the Russia investigation. He's talking about career appointees who have one job, and that is to serve the country. And you know, he has this idea. You can see it in his remarks that there is this deep state conspiracy. I guarantee you, when he watched the coverage of yesterday's hearing, he was thinking, here are these same people in the deep state. They've been out to get me from the beginning. They're still out to get me. They're contradicting me on all of these policy issues. That's not what they're doing. They're just doing their jobs, trying to protect the country.
And he's the one that creates the conflict between serving the country and serving the country's president. Yeah,
because he can't look at something and see that black is black and white is white. If he wants black to be white, that's what he says. And to this question of I mean, I think it's relevant. This question of what would ever happen if we were in a national security emergency, it would entirely depend on who it's with. If it was one of his opponents, if it was, say, Iran that provoked a national security emergency, he would probably follow the advice of the career officials who told him and his political appointees
he attacked
who told him what
career officials of Iran this morning.
Well, but I mean, let's say that they sparked an emergency, and it was in his interest to be tough with them. He would probably follow the advice of the people telling him to be tough. But if it were Russia, if it were North Korea, someone who he's been trying to describe as our new allies, someone who he's smoothed relations with, you would see the opposite. You would see a crisis where you have the government pulling in 2 different ways because he can't face the facts as they're presented to him by people who are charged with looking at facts.
Ugh, the power of a love letter from Kim Jong-un.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.